I stood at the edge of the ballroom. The cake was still in my hands. Frost clung to the ribbon, my fingers stiff from the cold. No one looked up. No one waved. The music swelled, but not for me. I'd driven 9 hours through sleet and snow. Past flipped cars, past flashing hazard lights, past every gut instinct that told me not to come. I wasn't on the guest list. That much was clear the moment the valet asked if I was catering. I smiled, tried to laugh. No, I'm family. But inside, I was met with stares. Vina, my sister, stood near the champagne tower laughing with her bridesmaids. Until she saw me. Then her smile dropped. "You actually came," she said, like I was a rumor that had shown up. I set the cake down beside a row of untouched macarons. "I wouldn't miss it," I said, even though I should have. She didn't even touch the box. Across the room, I saw our mother in pearls, glass of wine in hand. She offered me an air kiss and said, "Let's not make this about you, okay?" My coat dripped onto the carpet. No one offered to take it. I found the bathroom and locked the stall, pressed my back to the cold tile, and let the tears slide quietly down. When I came back, I stood behind the dessert table holding a plastic cup like armor. On the screen, a slideshow flickered: Vina in childhood, Vina at prom, Vina with our parents. I wasn't in a single frame. My phone buzzed. A group text: family core planning only. I wasn't meant to see it. One line from Vina's number: "She doesn't fit the look. We'll say the list was full." That's when I knew. This wasn't a mistake. It was a message. So I took one last look at the cake. 3 tiers of lemon and sugared violets. Still perfect, still untouched, just like me. Would you stay and smile or walk out for good? Where are you listening from? Has anyone ever erased you like this? Subscribe to Sophia's Revenge Stories for real stories of betrayal, justice, and healing. I didn't leave the motel until the sun had fully risen. The air outside was thin and bitter, the kind that clings to your coat even after you've zipped it to your chin. I stood for a moment near the entrance, the neon vacancy sign, humming softly above me, casting flickering red light across the melting snow. My car looked like a relic coated in a sheet of gray slush and salt. I scraped the windshield in silence, watching as streaks of ice fell away, revealing the road ahead like some kind of metaphor I didn't ask for. There were 14 missed calls on my phone. I didn't check who they were from. I didn't want to hear their voices, especially the ones that waited too long to say anything. I kept the radio off during the drive home. No music. No talking. Just the sound of tires rolling over salt and gravel and the occasional sharp rattle of something loose in the backseat. The box with the cake sat beside me on the passenger seat. It had shifted slightly, the gold ribbon now crumpled at one corner. But it was still intact. Still untouched. Just like me. I arrived at my apartment just before noon. The building was quiet, the kind of quiet that reminded me most of Sundays in the suburbs: distant dogs barking, the slow hum of an old furnace, the soft creak of wooden stairs. Inside, everything smelled faintly of lavender and winter air. I slipped off my boots at the door, toes numb, ankles stiff. There was a small puddle forming beneath them, already bleeding into the entryway rug. I didn't care. I didn't move it. I carried the cake into the kitchen and placed it on the counter. That was the first time I really looked at it. 3 layers, perfectly frosted in lemon cream. Tiny sugared violets encircling the base. A fondant ribbon that read, "To love, to laughter, to forever." The irony burned in my throat. I didn't open the box. I didn't even untie the ribbon. I just stood there staring at it like it might speak. Then I turned off the lights, walked into my living room, and sat down on the couch in the dark. I wrapped my father's old sweatshirt around me, the one with the collar fraying and the faint smell of pine that never fully faded. I didn't cry. I didn't move. I just breathed long and slow while outside the city kept going without me. By late afternoon, the apartment had started to warm up. The radiator rattled in the corner like it was struggling to keep pace with the cold settling into the walls. I pulled a blanket over my knees and stared at the window. The snow outside had begun to melt, dripping rhythmically from the gutters onto the sidewalk below. Everything looked normal. but nothing felt that way. I reached for my laptop on the coffee table and flipped it open. The screen glowed blue, blinking with unread messages I didn't want to see. I clicked into my inbox anyway, scrolling without focus until I saw a subject line from 5 weeks ago: planning notes, engagement weekend, ASO. It was from Vina. I hesitated, then opened it. Does I know we haven't always agreed on things, but this weekend is about family. I want you there. I really do. I read it 3 times slower each time, letting the words unravel in my chest. It felt like a lie written in cursive, neat, gentle, carefully practiced. I closed the email and opened another folder, one I hadn't touched in years. Family photos, originals. The thumbnails appeared like ghosts. Christmas in 1997, Lake George trip in '03. My college graduation, blurry and dim, but there I was smiling in the corner. And then the newer ones. Vina's yoga retreat. Mom's birthday brunch last year. A cousin's wedding in Montauk. In photo after photo, I was missing. Not cropped. Not hidden. Just not there. Like someone had made a decision somewhere along the way that I didn't belong. I leaned back, the old couch cushion sighing beneath me. I let my eyes close, not out of peace, but exhaustion. Not a single person at that party had asked if I'd made it home safe. Not a single one had texted, "Are you okay?" They just posted photos. Tagged each other, laughed about how beautiful the night had been. A perfect evening, they called it. And maybe it had been because I wasn't in it. I opened my phone again, this time going to the family group chat. There were dozens of unread messages. I scrolled through them slowly, watching my name appear exactly once. Just give her space. She's always been emotional. From my mother. That night, I pulled an old photo album from the hallway shelf. Not the digital kind, the real one. Heavy. Dusty. Covered in faded blue fabric. The corners frayed like it had been opened and closed by years of hands, though probably not mine recently. I flipped it open page by page, tracing the ridged plastic that covered each photo. There we were in matching dresses. There she was blowing out birthday candles. There I was in the background, blurry, half-shadowed, arms folded like I wasn't sure I was supposed to be in the shot. Sometimes I was centered. Other times I looked like a guest at someone else's life. I paused on one page. A snapshot from the Fall Mom's annual Thanksgiving dinner. Long table, cream tablecloth. Turkey. Candles. Laughter frozen mid-frame. Vina sat beside our mother, her hand curled around a wine glass. The seat next to them was empty. That was supposed to be mine. I remembered that night. I'd canceled last minute because of a sinus infection. No one called to check on me. No plate had been saved. I turned the page. There was a note in Mom's handwriting. Our girls so grateful. Only one daughter was in that photo. I set the album down and stood, suddenly needing air. The apartment felt small, like the walls were pressing in. I opened the window. Cold rushed in, immediate and sharp, biting at my face. Below, the streetlights reflected off wet pavement. A couple passed by, laughing about something I couldn't hear. I closed the window slowly. Then, for reasons I still can't fully explain, I walked back to the kitchen. The cake box still sat there untouched. I lifted the lid. The lemon frosting had held its shape. The violets sparkled under the light. The fondant banner still read, "To love, to laughter, to forever." I picked up a fork, stood in silence, and took the smallest bite. Just enough to taste it, to confirm it was real. It was sweet. Too sweet. Fake sweet, the kind that coats your tongue but leaves you emptier than before. I put the fork down, closed the lid, and slid the whole box into the fridge. Then I turned off the lights and let the darkness return. 3 days passed. Not one person called. Not Mom, not Vina. Not even Aunt Claire, who usually texted once a week with church gossip and half-hearted concern. It was like I had never driven through a blizzard. Like I had never been there at all. On Thursday, I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of lukewarm coffee between my hands. Outside, the clouds hung low gray and dull, casting a dim light over the counter where the cake box still sat unopened since that one bite. I hadn't touched it again. It felt like a monument now, something sacred and sad and rotting all at once. My inbox chimed. It was an email thread titled Engagement Gift Summary for the thank you cards, Chum from Vina. There were 15 names listed. Each name had a gift description, custom artwork, wine, fridge, cash, envelope. There were little hearts and thank you notes beside each. My name wasn't there. I stared at the screen, blinking slowly, as if my name might appear if I refreshed hard enough. I didn't. Instead, I clicked reply. Typed one sentence. I brought the cake. I hovered over send. Then hit delete. What was the point? She didn't forget. She excluded. That's a different kind of hurt. That afternoon, I opened the group chat by accident. I meant to text a client. Instead, my thumb slipped and suddenly I was staring at a thread I hadn't touched in weeks. Weller family updates. The name alone made my chest tighten. I scrolled up, photos from the brunch. Vina in her white shawl holding a mimosa. Mom with her classic pearls, Blythe with her smug grin. Captioned. What a beautiful celebration. Couldn't have asked for more. Hi, I wasn't in any of them. But I saw someone had responded with a comment, we missed Odessa, and then Blythe replied. She always makes things complicated. Best to let the air stay light. No one corrected her. No one pushed back. Even worse, Mom reacted with a heart. I stared at that tiny red icon for a long time. Longer than I should have. It's strange how much pain can fit inside a pixel. A few minutes later, I got a message one-on-one from my cousin Elise. She was always the quiet one. The one who never said much. Hey. Just wanted to say I saw what they wrote. I don't think it was fair. That was it. No defense, no outrage. Just enough to feel like pity. Not enough to feel like protection. I typed thanks. Then deleted it. Again. I didn't need more silence in return. Instead, I closed the app, walked to the kitchen, and poured the coffee down the sink. The mug clanged louder than expected in the porcelain basin. It startled me, and that said, more than I wanted it to. I hadn't realized how much tension I was holding in my shoulders until that moment. That evening, I tried to work. My home office was small, just a desk near the window, a corkboard with pinned sketches, and a calendar with Vina's wedding date still circled in gold ink. I hadn't crossed it out yet. I didn't know if I could. The light outside dimmed into that purplish-blue hue I always loved. The city below looked quiet, washed clean by slush and melting ice. But I couldn't focus. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, unmoving. All I could think about was that cake. Still sitting in my fridge. Still whole. A part of me wanted to throw it in the trash. Another part couldn't bring herself to do it, because it was proof. Proof that I had shown up. Proof that I tried. I walked into the hallway and opened the closet. There, folded neatly, was the navy blue scarf my father used to wear every winter. I hadn't touched it in years. It still smelled faintly of cedar. I pressed it to my face, and just for a second I felt like someone saw me again. He would have noticed. He would have said something, anything. He would have saved me a seat. My phone buzzed on the desk behind me. One new notification. A photo, tag Vina's Instagram. Caption, surrounded by love. Forever grateful. Location, bridal menu tasting. The image showed 10 people seated around a long table, glasses raised mid-toast. The bridal party. And on the table in front of them, small white boxes with gold foil lettering. To my bridesmaid, thank you for standing with me. I counted. 10 boxes, 10 chairs, 10 names in the comments. Mine wasn't one of them. Not even close. I let the screen go dark in my hand. Then I whispered it aloud for the first time, not as a question but as fact. They don't want me there. And for once, I didn't argue with myself. I stood in the dark, wrapped in my father's scarf, staring out the window at the empty street below. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel sad. I felt removed. And maybe that was step one. That Saturday night, I made dinner for one. Grilled salmon, wild rice, and a side of roasted carrots. It was the kind of meal I used to make when I had clients coming over, clean, composed, never messy. Now it just felt like ritual. Something to keep my hands busy. The apartment was too quiet again. I kept the television on in the background, not really watching. Just letting the noise distract me from what my mind wouldn't stop repeating. I sat down at the small kitchen table, my plate still steaming, and reached for my phone. Not because I wanted to. Because some part of me couldn't let go yet. The group chat was still active, family core planning only. I shouldn't have still had access to it. Maybe someone forgot to remove me. Maybe they assumed I'd never look, but I did. The latest messages were from that morning. Mom. Don't worry, she won't cause trouble. She never does. Blythe, let's just not invite her to the bridal shower. Too much energy. Vina, she doesn't fit the look. She'll understand eventually. I stared at that last one, let it sit there. Not out of shock, but out of recognition. I'd heard those words before. Years ago. From a wedding coordinator who said I was too modern for a classic church ceremony. From a recruiter who said I was a bit intense for their creative team. But hearing it from my own sister, that was different. That was permanent. I dropped my fork, the sound sharp against the plate. My appetite vanished. I stood and walked to the fridge. Opened the door. Stared at the cake box like it was daring me to react. It was still perfect, still untouched. Still waiting for a celebration that never needed me. I sat back down at the table, this time without the plate. I didn't want food. I wanted the truth, whatever shards of it I hadn't already stepped on. So I went digging. Into old texts, into saved screenshots, into emails I had ignored during the engagement planning months. And that's where I found it. An attachment in a forwarded message. A spreadsheet. Bridal party styling. Final notes. I opened it. Each tab labeled by name: bridesmaids, maid of honor, mother of the bride. I clicked through slowly, breath shallow. Hairstyles, color swatches, shoe options, custom makeup preferences. Every detail coordinated to a shade of blush and gold. And then one line caught my eye under a column titled, Notes from V, next to my name. Or rather, where my name used to be. It had been struck through. Not deleted. Just crossed out. Beside it, 2 words in red font. Too cold. That was it. That was the reason I'd been erased. Not a scheduling conflict. Not a misunderstanding. Just a quiet judgment written in a digital cell. Too cold. I didn't even know what that meant anymore. Was it how I looked? How I spoke? How I didn't perform joy the way they wanted? I stood up and walked into the hallway. Opened the closet. Pulled down the old shoebox I hadn't touched in years. Inside were letters. Birthday cards from Dad. A dried corsage from prom. A torn envelope with Vina's handwriting from when she'd lived in Portland. I opened the letter. Des, I miss you. Everything here feels too loud without you. I wish you were closer again. Love, V. I held it in shaking hands. Not from sadness. From the sting of knowing she had once wanted me near. And now I wasn't even wanted on a spreadsheet. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. The apartment was still except for the soft whir of the radiator and the occasional groan of the pipes behind the walls. Winter in Boston had its own soundtrack, quiet, aching, deliberate. I lay on the couch, fully dressed, my phone resting on my chest, like a weight I couldn't shake. Then it buzzed. A message from Vina. Not a call. Not even a voice note. Just a short, clean text. Hey. Hope you're okay. Just wanted to clarify something. I stared at the screen. Not because of the words, but because of the timing. No one texts at 11:42 p.m. with good intentions. Not after days of silence. Not after your absence has been made convenient for everyone. I opened it anyway. I didn't mean for you to feel left out. The group chat got messy. Let's talk soon. Got messy. Like exclusion was an accident. Like my erasure was just bad formatting. I set the phone down face first on the coffee table. It lit up once more. A notification from Instagram. Vina went live, bridal Q&A and update. Of course she did. I clicked it. Out of impulse, out of curiosity. Out of that masochistic reflex that still hoped for decency. She was smiling flawless seated in a glowing room lit with candles and string lights. Her voice breezy. So many of you asked, who's in my bridal party? And yes. It's final now, no drama. Just vibes. She laughed. The chat filled with heart emojis. We really wanted people who reflected the energy of the relationship, you know. Supportive, soft, present. I didn't hear anything else. I didn't need to. That was the performance. And the role I was cast in invisible. I closed the app. Stood up. And walked toward the kitchen again. I opened the fridge. Pulled out the cake. Set it on the counter. The cold air rushed over my face. My fingers gripped the lid, not shaking anymore, just firm. And for the first time since the party, I said it aloud. She made her choices. And now I was going to make mine. If you discovered your family was erasing you on purpose, would you stay silent or speak up? Sunday morning came and went like a sigh. I stayed in bed longer than I should have, curled beneath the old quilt my grandmother gave me years ago. It smelled like fabric softener and something older like dust and memory. Sunlight leaked through the blinds in broken stripes. Outside, I could hear the low hum of traffic, a dog barking in the distance, the usual clatter of city life moving on without me. I hadn't opened the fridge since the night before. The cake was still in there. It felt ridiculous now. A $300 monument to silence. I forced myself up, made coffee that went cold before I could drink it, then stood in the kitchen barefoot, gripping the counter like it could steady the shaking inside me. The house felt hollow. Not quiet hollow. Like every object had seen too much and didn't know how to comfort me. I walked over to the shelf above my desk and pulled down an old photo frame. It held a picture of me and Vina from 5 Christmases ago. We were both laughing, genuine, unfiltered joy. I remembered that moment. Dad had just burned the ham, and we were mock screaming at the smoke alarm while Mom opened a second bottle of wine. That photo had traveled with me through 2 apartments. It used to sit beside my computer. Now it felt like it belonged to someone else's life. I set it down face down. The glass made a soft sound against the wood. I didn't cry. I just stood there, swallowing the heavy knot in my throat, feeling the weight of every unanswered text, every edited out photo, every fake smile I'd given just to keep peace. And for what? So they could say I was difficult when I stopped pretending. I walked back to the couch and sat with my knees tucked under me, arms crossed over my chest like armor. The radiator hissed in the background, and somewhere above a neighbor was playing jazz too loud. But it wasn't the music that unsettled me. It was the stillness inside me. Like something was dying. Or maybe being born. Around 4 in the afternoon, I heard the mail slot click. Usually it was bills. Occasionally a coupon packet I never opened. But today an envelope slid across the hardwood and landed face up near the door. I walked over slowly. It was cream-colored. Thick paper. Gold foil lettering. My name printed in perfect script, Odessa Weller. No return address. No message inside, just an invitation. Bridal shower celebrating Vina Weller, location Mom's house. Date 2 weeks from now. Note, please bring a recipe card for the memory table. The absurdity of it made me laugh. A recipe card. Like we were little girls again, scribbling cupcake instructions in sparkly ink and calling it legacy. I flipped the card over. No handwriting. No note. Just a mechanical gesture. Sent out of obligation, or worse, out of guilt. I sat down on the floor by the door, the cold seeping through my leggings, the card trembling slightly in my hand. Then I texted Mom. Did you mean to include me? A full hour passed. Then came the reply. Of course. Just try to keep things light, okay? It's her moment. I stared at the screen, my thumb frozen above the keyboard. Keep things light. As if I'd been the one to dim the lights. as if I'd swallowed the laughter from every room and made myself too visible. I didn't respond. Instead, I stood, walked to the hallway closet, pulled out an old sweater I hadn't worn in years. It still smelled faintly of her perfume, Vina's, the one she wore all through college. I'd given it to her once. She'd left it behind years later like an afterthought. I held it for a minute, unsure whether to keep it or toss it. Then I folded it carefully, placed it in a donation bag near the door. She didn't need pieces of me anymore. And I was done leaving parts of myself behind for people who never looked back. That night, I couldn't bring myself to turn on the lights. I moved through the apartment in semi-darkness, guided by the dull glow of the street lamps outside. The invitation sat on the counter, untouched. Mocking. I turned on the kettle out of habit, but when the water boiled, I didn't make tea. I just let it whistle until it annoyed me enough to stop it. In the living room, a small wooden box sat on the shelf. Inside were prints from a disposable camera Vina and I had used during our childhood trip to Maine. I pulled them out one by one. In one, we were sitting on the edge of a dock, feet in the water, eating popsicles. In another, we were mid-laugh, hair tangled by the wind, cheeks flushed from sunburn. We looked inseparable. And for years, I believed we were. But now I couldn't recognize the girl in those photos or the sister beside her. I placed the stack of pictures back inside the box, slower this time. My fingers lingered on the lid before I shut it completely. Then came the email ping. I walked over to my laptop. It was from my former florist assistant Nina. Subject: hey, just a heads up, Vina's friend reached out. I opened it. She asked if I'd be available to do the florals for the shower, said she wanted someone fresh and elegant, not too intense. Just wanted to check if you were already doing it. My chest went still. They hadn't even bothered to ask me. They'd reached out to someone I trained, someone I mentored for a job I had done for family dozens of times. And worse, they described me like a problem to avoid. I didn't reply. I didn't forward the email. I just closed the laptop, stood in the center of the room, and let the silence settle like dust on my skin. For the first time, I stopped asking what I had done wrong. And started asking what would happen if I stopped waiting to be chosen. On Monday morning, I woke up before the alarm. Not because I had somewhere to be, but because my body was done resting. Something had shifted. Not all at once, but steadily, like the slow cracking of ice underfoot. The apartment was quiet. The air smelled like dust and bergamot from the candle I never lit. I made coffee. This time I drank it while it was hot. Then I sat down at my desk, turned on my laptop, and opened a blank document. Not a diary. Not a letter, just a list. What I know. I wrote the words in bold. Then started typing beneath them. I wasn't on the guest list. I wasn't included in the planning group. I was erased from the gift registry. My name was struck through in a bridal spreadsheet. They spoke about me on a public live stream. They hired my former assistant behind my back. They described me as too cold, too intense, complicated. I stopped there, not because I was done, but because I finally saw it clearly. This wasn't just a pattern, it was a system. And I'd let it run too long without calling it what it was. A campaign of quiet erasure. I opened another tab. Typed the name of a small law firm a friend once recommended, one that handled estate matters, family conflict, digital defamation. I didn't hit send on the inquiry. Not yet, but the window stayed open. I needed to know my options. Not to sue. Not to burn it down. Just to stop being the one who keeps things light. I spent the next few hours printing screenshots, photos, emails, group chat messages. Each one slid out of my dusty home printer with a soft hum, warm to the touch, smelling faintly of ink and heat. I laid them out on the floor one by one across the living room rug. Rows and rows of receipts. Not for revenge. For clarity. I wasn't making this up. I wasn't overreacting. I wasn't too sensitive. I was documenting. A copy of the group message where they called me complicated. A photo of the bridal party gift table with one box missing. The email from Nina. The strike-through in the spreadsheet. The Instagram live stream. My invoice for the untouched cake. I stapled some together, filed others by date. Labeled a folder truth not drama. I paused once when I came across the text from Mom. Just try to keep things light, okay? I almost crumpled it. Almost let myself cry. But instead I pressed it flat on the table and wrote above it in pen. This is how silence is taught. I didn't tell anyone what I was doing. No big announcement. No cryptic post. No email drafted with the subject line. Let's clear the air. This wasn't about confrontation. Not yet. This was about preparation. They had written their version. And I had finally stopped erasing mine. That night I sat at the dining table long after dinner. The only light came from under the kitchen cabinets, dim, yellow, soft on the edges. Everything around me cast a shadow, the bowl in the sink, the candle on the counter, the envelope I hadn't moved since morning. The cake was still in the fridge. Untouched like a private joke only I wasn't allowed to laugh at. I poured myself half a glass of red wine. Not to relax. To anchor myself. To feel the weight of the glass in my hand and know I was still here, still solid. In front of me sat the invitation to Vina's shower. Still sealed, still thick with silence. I didn't open it. I didn't toss it. Instead, I slid it into the folder I labeled earlier. Truth not drama. Next to it I placed printed screenshots. Messages, a photo of the bridal table. The quote from Mom, just try to keep things light. I wrote on the back of it in black pen, that's how women are taught to vanish. Then I stood and walked slowly to the hallway. I opened the drawer that used to hold thank you cards and scented pens. Now it held something heavier, my old journal. I flipped past empty pages until I found one that felt right. The paper was slightly warped. A coffee ring stained the bottom corner. And I wrote, "You are not invisible. You are simply inconvenient to the version of family they like better." I underlined it once, then I added, "They curated an image. I carried the cost." The radiator hissed behind me. Outside, the snow had stopped, but the streetlight still flickered against the wet sidewalk. For a moment, I imagined what it would feel like to show this to them. To drop the folder on the table during brunch. To say nothing and let the truth speak louder. But I wasn't there yet. What I knew was this: I didn't want revenge. I wanted recognition, and I was done begging for it. At 12:37 a.m., I opened my browser and typed the name Marla Townsend, Family Dispute Advisor. Her site loaded slowly. The tagline blinked at the top in soft blue. "When they write you out, we help you right back in." I bookmarked the page. Didn't call. Didn't fill the form. Just left the tab open. And then I did something I hadn't done in years. I turned on the voice recorder on my phone. And said out loud, "This is where I stop letting other people decide who I am." Tuesday morning, I changed my routine. No coffee first. No social scroll. No scanning the inbox for what else they might have said behind my back. Instead, I opened the folder labeled, Truth Not Drama. And I laid everything out one more time on my dining table. There were no confetti pieces, no dramatic letters, just printed proof. Black ink on white paper. Screenshots with timestamps. Phrases I hadn't imagined. I opened my laptop and began organizing it like a case file. Because that's what it was now. I wasn't going to burn bridges. I was going to illuminate them, show exactly where they were weak and why they never held me. I made a list. What they took, my voice in the family. My professional place. My name from their events. My presence in the narrative. What they left, silence. A seat that was never mine. An untouched cake. A woman they underestimated. By noon, I had 5 labeled folders on my desktop. Visuals, messages, witnesses, timeline, receipts, and one more: release, not revenge. I wasn't doing this for applause. I wasn't doing it to ruin them. I was doing it because they already wrote their story. Now it was time I published mine. That afternoon, I drafted a letter. Not to Vina. Not to Mom. Not even to Blythe, who'd played cheerleader for every exclusion. This one was for Vina's fiancé, Logan. We'd only met twice. Once at a family barbecue where he shook my hand like he didn't expect me to be smart. Once at Mom's birthday dinner where he called me intense after I corrected his story. Still, he was marrying into the machine. He deserved to see the gears behind it. I opened a clean document. Hi Logan. You don't know me well. And that's by design. There's a version of me floating around your circle, difficult, dramatic, divisive. I wanted to send you another. I attached 3 screenshots. No commentary. Just their words. Their actions. Their tone. The caption under one said, "Imagine if she crashed." Silence and sympathy. I stared at that sentence. It wasn't just a joke. It was a wish. I saved the draft but didn't hit send yet. Instead, I wrote a second version, cleaner, shorter. One that included a line I'd practiced silently all morning. If this is the kind of truth you'd want someone to show you before you marry into it, I'm doing you a favor. If not, feel free to ignore it like they did me. I saved that one too. Later that day I called Elise, my cousin. The quiet one. She'd messaged once after the brunch, just one line. I saw what they said. I don't think it was fair. I never responded. Now I did. Would you be willing to say that again? I asked her. She hesitated. Then she said, "If you're telling the truth, I will." That was enough. I didn't need 30 people. I needed one name. One witness. One fact to anchor the storm. At 6:47 p.m. I opened my email. Typed 3 names in the 2-line Logan. Mom. Vina. In the subject, uninvited but not unnoticed. I didn't add an introduction. Didn't ask for understanding. Just attached a PDF labeled receipts. Inside were screenshots. Photo timestamps. The text that said she doesn't fit the look. The email to my former assistant. The comment about me crashing for sympathy. Then one final photo, the cake. Sitting untouched in the back of the catering kitchen, still sealed. Taken through a window, timestamped, framed in cold light. Underneath it, I typed only this. Some things are too quiet to notice until they're documented. This is me noticing. And I hit send. No dramatics, no countdown. Just a soft click. And it was out there. A truth they couldn't unsee. A version of me they couldn't overwrite. I stood by the window after that. Watched a delivery truck double park. A teenager jogged across the street in pajama pants. Some neighbor burned dinner. The smell of scorched garlic floated through my hallway vent. The world was still spinning. But mine had just tilted. I picked up my phone and opened Instagram. Chose 3 images from my camera roll. A photo of the snowy highway taken through my windshield. A close-up of the cake box ribbon intact, resting alone. A blurry selfie outside the venue, red cheeks, wet hair, holding the cake. Captioned it simply. Sometimes you show up. And they pretend you never did. But your silence. It's not their property anymore. I didn't tag anyone, didn't leave comments on. Then I turned off the phone, placed it face down on the counter. And whispered, "I'm ready." By the time I woke up, the silence was no longer comforting. It was expectant, like the pause before thunder. Like the breath someone takes right before they speak the thing you can't unhear. My phone was hot with notifications. Missed calls. Texts. Mentions I couldn't see because I'd turned comments off. I didn't check them yet. Instead, I walked to the kitchen and made tea. Not coffee. Something gentler. Something that didn't scrape my insides raw. The kettle whistled softly. Outside, the sun hit the windows in slanted lines. It looked like any other morning. But it wasn't. I sat at the table with the mug cupped in both hands and finally opened my inbox. 6 new messages from Mom. The first one was a simple question, "What are you doing?" The second was more pointed. "You're making this about you again." By the 5th it had sharpened, "You're ruining her life." And the sixth, silent. No subject. No body, just her name. I opened Vina's message next. If you wanted to talk to me, you could have just called. You didn't need to post for strangers. This is family. You don't air family. I stared at that last line. You don't air family. But they had. They aired my absence. They made me into a warning, a punchline, a shadow in the corner of a room I used to belong to. I closed the laptop, went to my bedroom, opened the drawer with the box of printed photos and old Christmas cards, pulled out the one thing I hadn't touched in years, Dad's cufflink case. It was empty now except for one thing. A folded note. He'd written it on my 30th birthday, the last one before he passed. Des, don't let people define your silence. Use it. And when it's time, speak like you've never been interrupted. I pressed the paper flat against the edge of the dresser. Then walked back to my desk. Logged into my secondary email. The one I never gave to family. Attached the full PDF. Photos. Timeline. Screenshots. In the subject line for context, recipient Logan's father. He'd always been civil. Too quiet to fully trust, but too professional to fully ignore. If Vina wanted a curated wedding with curated people, then the people financing it deserved a curated truth. I clicked send. And in that second, I didn't feel petty. I felt aligned. By mid-afternoon, I had 2 new voicemails. One from Logan, one from his mother. I didn't listen to either. Instead, I went for a walk. Boston air in early spring was sharp but honest. The sidewalks were still crusted with old salt. The wind carried a scent of thawing metal like city breath waking up. My phone buzzed again, this time with a forwarded message from Elise. She'd been added to a new group thread. Emergency bridal strategy chat B. Elise screenshotted and sent it to me without comment. We need to control the story before it spreads. Vina. Should we say she's having mental health issues again? Blythe number. Logan's dad already saw it. He called and asked what the hell was going on. Mom. And then we may need to postpone the dinner. For optics. Logan, I read that line 5 times. Not cancel. Postpone. For optics. Because when truth gets inconvenient, they don't apologize, they reschedule. When I got back to my apartment, a card was taped to my door. Handwritten. In familiar, slanted script. Odessa. This isn't the way. Please call me. Mom. No envelope, no phone number. Just the same handwriting she used when I was 7 and got blamed for something Vina did. I left it there. Let the wind lift the bottom edge, curl it like a corner of a burned page. I didn't go online that night, didn't refresh, didn't check for responses. Instead, I poured myself tea, sat by the window, and watched the quiet. Then my phone buzzed one last time. It was from Logan. A single text. I saw it all. I'm sorry. I believed the wrong people. No follow-up, no excuses. And that hit harder than all the noise combined. The bridal shower was not canceled, but it was quieter. Less guests. No photographer, no balloons. I went. Not because I needed to be seen, but because I was done hiding. When I walked into Mom's house, the room still just half a beat. Not loud. Not obvious. But enough for me to feel it, like walking into a room still echoing with the tail end of a sentence that had my name in it. Vina stood near the dining table, pink silk blouse, perfectly curled hair, smiling too widely. She blinked when she saw me. Then stepped forward. You came, I was invited, I said, setting a gift box down on the table. No tag. No ribbon, just clean paper and weight. From the corner, Blythe whispered something. Another bridesmaid stifled a nervous laugh. I didn't flinch. I turned to Logan's mother instead. She gave me a slow nod. Her expression unreadable, but her silence. That spoke volumes. Midway through the event, Vina raised her glass. I just want to say thank you to everyone here for standing by me through all this noise. That word noise landed like a stone in a still lake. I stood. Quietly. No fork clinking. No dramatic speech. Just my voice. Steady. Sometimes noise is what truth sounds like when you've tried to bury it too long. Every head turned. Sometimes a woman has to post her absence just to prove she existed at all. Vina's hand gripped her glass tighter. Odessa, this isn't. This is exactly what it is, I interrupted. And you know it. Logan looked at her then. Really looked. Not with affection, with clarity. I walked out before dessert. Didn't need to see who followed. Didn't care who clapped, because the justice wasn't in the drama, it was in the shift. The room had changed, and this time I hadn't. The morning after the shower the world was still, not quiet still. Like a lake after a storm, surface glass smooth, but underneath everything different. I woke up without checking my phone. No dread, no hope. Just space. For the first time in weeks I didn't feel the need to defend myself. The sun came through the window in soft stripes. It caught the edge of the coffee table, the folds of the blanket. I hadn't folded the teacup from last night. It was cold now. I picked it up anyway, held it like a weight. Ceramic and memory. The scent of old chamomile still lingered. I moved slowly through the apartment. Not because I was tired, because everything deserved to be felt now. Even silence. On the hallway shelf sat the folder. Truth, not drama. Still there, I hadn't touched it since the bridal shower. Didn't need to. The truth had already done its job. It had cracked the mirror. And now no one could pretend they didn't see the lines. I opened the hall closet and started pulling things out. The photo from Dad's funeral frame, too shiny like they tried to package grief. The candle Vina gave me 2 Christmases ago, still sealed, a dusty apron with World's Best Big Sister in fading print. I laid them gently on the floor. Not to burn, not to throw. Just to see what I'd carried for too long. Some things we don't grieve until we finally set them down. I sat in the doorway, knees pulled and palms flat on the wood. The floor was cool. Grounding. My breath moved slower. I wasn't waiting anymore. Not for an apology. Not for a fix. Some goodbyes don't come with a slam. They come with a door that quietly closes behind you because you finally stopped looking back. By noon I had filled an entire box. Not with clothes. Not with objects I hated, but with the things that once meant something until they didn't. A faded scarf Vina left behind when she moved to Portland. A birthday card signed by everyone except me. A necklace Mom gave me because it didn't suit Vina's neckline. A printed itinerary from a family trip I'd paid for but somehow wasn't in any of the photos. Each item held a shape. Each shape held silence. It didn't hurt, not exactly. It felt more like clarity. Like a lens had been wiped clean, and now I could finally see how much I'd been squinting through denial. I sat on the rug with one of Dad's old flannel shirts folded in my lap. I hadn't worn it in years. Too warm, too big. Too much memory. But I held it anyway. Breathed it in. Faint cedar. Fabric softener. And something I couldn't name, something like permission. When he was alive, Dad never asked me to play small. He let me be loud when I needed to be. He let me cry without asking why. I remembered a moment Christmas Eve maybe 10 years ago. Vina had called me dramatic over some small thing. I'd laughed too loud, corrected, a story used the wrong fork. It didn't matter. After dinner Dad found me outside on the porch, arms folded tight against the cold. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. Lied. He handed me a mug of hot cider. Didn't push. "You're not the problem," he said. "You just remember what real feels like." That line stayed with me longer than I realized, because deep down I always knew they weren't uncomfortable because I was too much. They were uncomfortable because I didn't fake it like they did. I folded the flannel carefully. Set it aside. Not to forget, but to protect it from the noise they kept trying to drag me into. Some memories deserve silence. Others deserve to be left out of the next box. That evening, I packed the box. The same one I'd filled earlier, now sealed, marked, taped. No label on the outside, no message inside. Just the quiet weight of memory taped shut for good. I didn't tell anyone where it was going. Not even myself. I called a courier. Scheduled it for pickup. Gave them Mom's address. No note. No return. Let them open it. Let them wonder. Let them sit with the objects they left behind while pretending I was never part of it. The apartment felt lighter after the box was gone. Not empty, just mine again. The absence of that weight made room for something else. Not joy, not peace, but a kind of unclenching. I opened the windows. Let the spring air in. Let the distant city noise fold into the silence. Let the sharp scent of asphalt and pollen push out the stale air of holding my breath too long. I didn't play music. Didn't journal. Didn't light a candle. I just stood there barefoot on the cool floor listening to nothing. And for once nothing didn't scare me. It felt deserved. My phone buzzed around 6:15 p.m. It was Elise. They're spinning a new story now. You stormed out, you embarrassed her. You made it about yourself. I replied, let them. No defense, no correction. Because I was no longer on trial. Let them cling to a version of me they built for their comfort. I had no interest in staying inside it. I looked over at my bookshelf half empty now, and I saw it. A small framed quote I forgot I owned. Closure isn't an apology, it's a decision. I left it where it was. This time I didn't pack it. I didn't give it away. Because that one belonged to me. The next morning I didn't check their pages. Didn't scroll. Didn't search for signs of what they were saying now that the dust had settled. I didn't care. I made coffee. Folded laundry. Watered the plant I'd forgotten for 3 weeks. That afternoon I took a walk to the corner bakery. The one I used to pass by but never entered. Inside smelled like vanilla lemon zest and warm sugar. The woman behind the counter smiled. Can I help you? I nodded. I'd like to place an order. She pulled out a notepad. What kind of occasion? I paused. Then smiled. No occasion. Just me. She blinked then smiled back. I like that. I chose something simple. A white cake. No flowers, no fondant banner, just gold dust on the top. And inside lemon. My favorite. I gave her my name. Paid in full. When she handed me the receipt, I folded it carefully and slipped it into my coat pocket. I walked back slowly. Breeze light against my face. Nothing in my chest felt tangled anymore. Back home, I lit a candle. Not for ritual, just for light. I opened my laptop. Breathed in. Typed the first words to a new post. For the ones who left quietly, who weren't picked, who were cropped out. This space is yours. I didn't hit publish. Not yet, but I saved it, and for once that was enough. It started with one message. No profile photo, no hashtags. Just a name, Claire. Your words made me stop crying. I thought I was the only one. But now I know I'm not crazy. I stared at her message for a long time. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I did. You're not crazy, you were just erased. By the end of the week, 37 more women had written to me. One had been cropped out of her family's holiday card. One was left off a retirement thank you speech after 22 years of service. One said her daughter's wedding slideshow didn't include a single photo of her. They used different words. Different cities, different timelines. But every story carried the same bruise underneath. They made me invisible. So I made a folder. I called it Uncropped. Not for drama, not for revenge, for proof. Then I built something simple. A blog. Just black text on a clean white background. No ads, no pop-ups. No space to fight in the comments. Each post started with the same line: this isn't about revenge. It's about being remembered. The first post wasn't mine. It was Claire's. With her permission. Her words. Her pain, raw and whole. Then came stories from a woman named Denise. And another from someone called Marcia W. And one labeled only as a mother who paid for the dress but wasn't invited to the altar. 12 stories. Then 30. then 50. It wasn't viral, it wasn't trending. It was quieter than that, but it was growing. Like moss. Like something that survives where people least expect it to. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was yelling into a void. I felt like I was opening a door. By mid-March, the stories didn't just live online anymore. They started arriving in my mailbox. Actual mail. Stamped. Folded. Some in envelopes with floral borders. Others typed printed sealed. One came on blue-lined notebook paper, smudged in the corner. I was edited out of my brother's will because I wasn't the right kind of family. He called it clean. I called it cruel. I made tea and read them in the quiet. Let the steam warm my face while their words thawed something inside me I hadn't touched in years. I didn't post all of them. Some were too raw. Some weren't ready. But I answered each one. No templates, no shortcuts. Just, I believe you. I'm glad you found your way here. You're not alone. I started printing the ones I'd already posted. Slipped each story into a clear sleeve. Labeled them by state, not by name. I bought a small filing cabinet from a secondhand shop, painted it ivory. Stenciled 2 words on the front in gold uncropped archive. It stood by my bookshelf. Taller than it looked at first glance. Like all the women inside it. I lit a candle each time I added a new one. Not for mourning. For marking. Every voice counted now, even the quietest ones. The email came on a Thursday morning. Subject line from one invisible woman to another. No signature, just AC. But the email domain was familiar. It belonged to a national nonprofit, one that quietly funded women-led projects in arts and advocacy. I recognized it from a grant page I'd once bookmarked and never dared apply to. I almost deleted the email. It looked too sincere to be real. But something about it pulled at me. I clicked. I found your site through a friend who sent me Marsha's story. I cried through half of it. Then I sat still for a long time. Because I realized you're doing something most of us don't even know how to begin. You're archiving the absence, and in doing that, you're giving it shape. That's not just storytelling, that's legacy work. I think we can help. I paused. She wasn't offering money, not directly. What she offered was space. A venue. A microphone. A quiet room. A small audience. A project she called the Remembered Room. A night where real women read each other's stories. No actors, no influencers. Just truth spoken aloud as it deserves to be. The idea scared me. Not because I didn't believe in it, but because I knew what it meant. It meant stepping out from behind the screen. From behind the page. From behind the soft comfort of anonymity. It meant letting people hear my voice shake in real time. I reread her message twice more. Then I closed my laptop and stood by the window. Outside, Charleston was thawing. The last piles of snow along the curb were slushy, flecked with grit and early spring pollen. My neighbor's wind chimes had returned to life, soft hollow clinks carried on the breeze. I hadn't opened the windows in weeks. That day, I cracked one. The air felt real. I responded with one line, "I'm listening." Within an hour, she called me. Her voice lower than I imagined, measured, strong. She didn't sell. She didn't persuade. She just said, "You built the archive. We'll build the space. Let's make room for the women who were never given one." And somehow in that moment, I said yes. Not out of ambition, not to be seen. But because something in me knew, this wasn't just a project anymore. It was a place to return to. For me. For them. For every woman who ever looked at a family photo and thought they made sure I wasn't in it. The first Remembered Room was nothing like a gala. No red carpets, no press. Just a small public library in North Charleston. Back room. Brown folding chairs. Paper cups of lukewarm tea. 12 women came. Some brought daughters. One brought a photo album she hadn't opened in 10 years. I wore black slacks and a cardigan with sleeves too long. I didn't wear makeup, didn't wear power heels. Just soft-soled flats and the earrings my mother once gave me for special occasions. This felt like one. There was no microphone. Just a circle. One chair left empty in the middle. A placeholder for every woman who couldn't be there yet. We took turns. No one was required to read their own story, most didn't. Instead, we read for one another. For strangers. For sisters. One woman, Janice, read Claire's letter. Her voice shook but never cracked. When she got to the line, he said I wasn't technically his sister after he remarried, so I wasn't technically invited. There was a collective breath. Not a gasp. Just stillness. I hadn't known how much silence could sound like solidarity. I read last. Not because I planned to, but because no one else picked up my story. When I opened the printout, my hands trembled. I hadn't read it aloud. Not once. I drove 9 hours with a cake in my lap. And they laughed about how peaceful it would have been if I never made it. No one interrupted. No one asked questions. When I finished, the woman beside me reached for my hand. She didn't say I'm sorry. She didn't say me too, she just squeezed once. Firm. Like closing a book not on me but on everything I wasn't going to carry alone anymore. At the end, we lit candles. Tiny ones. The kind you buy in 50 packs at the grocery store. Each woman placed her candle in the center and whispered a word. No explanations. Just enough. Still here, seen, free, visible. Mine was clear. After the event, we didn't hug. Not all of us. Some just nodded. Some left quietly, jackets folded over arms like shields. I stayed behind with AC. She helped fold chairs while I packed the printouts into a worn canvas bag. She smiled softly and said, "That didn't sound like revenge to me." "It wasn't," I said. "It was reclamation." She nodded. "That's even more powerful." The next morning, I got a message from a woman named Yvonne. She hadn't attended. She'd read the transcript online. "I'm not ready to speak. But I sent my story to the archive. I hope someday someone reads it and hears me anyway." That night, I added her letter to the ivory cabinet. Lit a candle. Wrote her back, "You are already heard." It's been 8 months. The remembered room now has chapters in 3 states. Each one starts the same way. A circle, an empty chair, and one sentence. This isn't about revenge, it's about being remembered. I still write back to every woman. Sometimes it's a sentence. Sometimes a whole page. Sometimes just, "You don't need to explain, you exist." That's enough. The ivory cabinet is now a bookshelf. Soon it may need a room of its own. I don't know what happens next. I'm not building a movement. I'm not building a brand. But I am building something, a place where women don't have to scream to be seen. Where absence is no longer mistaken for irrelevance. Where silence isn't peace, it's a beginning. If you've ever been erased, overlooked, or left off the list, your story belongs somewhere. And it's not too late. You are not too late. Share your truth in the comments below. Or whisper it into a room like this one. Some of us will still be listening. Always. I never planned to become the woman who lit a candle for strangers. But that's who I became. Because sometimes the greatest healing doesn't come from those who hurt you, it comes from those who recognize your silence and sit with it anyway. Looking back, I didn't need a spotlight, I needed a seat at the table. And when no one offered me one, I built a room. A room where no voice was too soft. No story too small, no hurt too old to matter. You see, forgiveness isn't always a grand gesture. Sometimes it's just allowing yourself to remember without bitterness. To love without losing yourself. To let go not because they deserve peace, but because you do. It took me years to understand this. You don't need everyone to believe your version of the story. You only need to believe it yourself. And to stand in that truth even if you stand alone. I've learned that being forgotten can feel like death by 1,000 cuts. But being seen even by one kind stranger can stitch you back together again. In life, we are not just daughters or sisters or mothers, we are witnesses to one another's becoming. And when one of us rises quietly after being knocked down, it gives the rest of us permission to do the same. So if you're reading this and you've ever felt erased, overlooked, or silenced, please know your story still matters. Even if they never say your name. Even if the invitation never came. Even if the seat was never saved. You still have a place. You still belong. And if no one ever told you this before, let me. You are not too much. You are never too much. Have you ever felt like the invisible one in your family or your life? Your story deserves to be heard. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comments, whether one line or one memory. This space is for you. And if you believe in stories that heal, empower, and quietly remind us we're not alone, subscribe to Sophia's Revenge Stories. We'll be here one story at a time.